One of the things that the raters are looking for on the writing test is the range of your vocabulary and how well you can use it. Now, when we are talking about vocabulary, we need to remember that the CELPIP test is not a test of academic English or business English. It's a test of general proficiency. That is, the kind of English you'd use in ordinary, day-to-day situations. Your goal isn't to use very rare or unusual words. It's just to use the words that would be most natural and suitable in a particular situation. There are two other things that you should remember about using vocabulary on the writing test. You should use a variety of words, and you should use words that have a precise meaning. To better understand these 3 points, let's look at an example of Task 2 and some sample responses from test takers. Here are the instructions from an example of Task 2. Alright, now let's take a look at some sample responses from test takers to help us understand what raters are looking for in terms of vocabulary. Let's start with the first point, using words that are natural and suitable in a particular situation. In this task, test takers are being asked to respond to a survey sent out by their manager. It's a good idea to express a degree of respect toward your supervisor. However, in Canada, the language we would use in this situation would be fairly informal. We'd probably address our manager by using his or her first name, and we'd likely start off by saying something like, "Hi, David." Some test takers make the mistake of using language that is too formal for the situation. Take a look at how this test taker started his response for this task. "Respected sir" is far too formal here. It also sounds a bit old-fashioned. As I mentioned earlier, something like "Hi David" would be fine. It shows your dignity and how much you care. Also seems out of proportion to the situation. The manager is asking employees to share their opinion about an issue that is causing some disagreement. It's nice of him to ask everyone for their opinion, but words like dignity and how much you care sound like they would suit a much more formal situation, not just asking for some feedback on a workplace issue. It would sound more natural to just say something like, "I think it's great that you are giving us all a chance to provide some feedback on this issue." Some test takers also make the opposite mistake. They use language that is too informal. Here's an example from another test taker. "Hope you're having a good time at work" is not really an appropriate way of greeting your boss, particularly when discussing overtime pay. We associate words and phrases like productivity and hard work with the workplace, not having a good time. In this case, a phrase like "I hope you are well" would be more natural. "Wanna" is a very informal way of saying "want to." It's really only acceptable when writing to a close friend, and you would never want to use it on a writing test. And actually, this whole phrase, "I just want to tell you that," sounds more like something you'd say to a friend. It really doesn't belong in a message to your manager. Let's move on to the next point, the importance of using a variety of words. Sometimes test takers use the same words or phrases over and over again. Whenever possible, you should try to show the raters the range of your vocabulary. If you find yourself repeating certain words or phrases, see if you can think of a different way of expressing the same meaning. Here's an example of this problem from a test taker. This test taker has repeated the phrase, "do some saving." Instead of using the same phrase twice, the test taker could have used this opportunity to show the range of his vocabulary and said something like, "It will be easy for the employee to put aside some of his or her salary for a rainy day." There is another thing to consider when it comes to showing the raters your ability to use a variety of words in your response. You should try to avoid repeating the words that appear in the instructions. It's much better to come up with a new way of saying the same thing. Here's an example from a test taker. Now, the phrases extra money for each hour and extra money as a bonus once a year if the company makes money have both been copied from the instructions. See? Here they are. It's not wrong to copy words from the instructions. If you can't think of any other words to use, don't worry about it. However, it is going to impress the raters a lot more if you are able to come up with some different words. Instead of extra money for each hour, the test taker could have said something like at a higher rate for each hour. And instead of extra money as a bonus once a year if the company makes money, she could have said an annual supplement if the company is profitable. That would have demonstrated for the raters a much wider grasp of vocabulary. Okay, now let's move on to the last point, using words that have a precise meaning. You want to avoid words with a vague or general meaning. It's better to use words that will express a specific meaning. This will help you develop your ideas more effectively. Let's take a look at an example of a sentence that lacks precision. Saying that one prefers a particular option because it is more helpful isn't very helpful. It's not going to help the raters to understand why someone thinks it is better to be paid for overtime. It would be an improvement to be more specific and say something like, I would prefer to be paid for overtime because I think it would help motivate me to work harder. By using words that contain specific details, we can develop the reasons that support our preference. Sometimes imprecise word choice can also be a bit confusing. Consider this example from a test taker. I think we can figure out what the test taker means by tiny things. He means something like simple tasks. But tiny things also sounds like it may refer to small objects, which is momentarily quite confusing. It's better to use specific language and avoid confusing the raters. Okay, so in this video we have looked at 3 key points to remember about using vocabulary in your writing response. Number 1, you should use words that are natural and suitable for a particular situation. Number 2, you should use a variety of words. And number 3, you should use words with a precise meaning. Throughout this video, we have used examples from real test takers in order to understand these 3 points. In each case,